Dive into a world where every raindrop carries secrets and every shadow hides a story of desperate hope and redemption. If you're captivated by mysteries that stir the soul, hit subscribe now and join the journey. On a stormy night in Seattle, the relentless rain pounded against the windows of Haven's Light, a modest but welcoming shelter that had stood as a beacon of hope for many. Grace Holloway, the shelter's dedicated director, sat in her small office reviewing shelter reports when a sudden, unusual sound caught her attention. It wasn't the regular howl of the wind or the pitter-patter of rain on the roof. It was a soft, desperate whimper coming from outside. For a moment, Grace hesitated, wondering if her imagination was playing tricks on her, but the sound grew steadily more insistent. Setting aside her paperwork, she pulled on her waterproof jacket and ventured out into the torrential downpour. As she stepped into the storm, Grace's eyes strained to see in the dim light, and the cold wind whipped across her face. At the shelter's doorstep, illuminated by the erratic flash of distant lightning, lay two large, soaked canvas bags. Their heavy, sodden appearance and the eerie silence that accompanied them sent a chill down her spine. Grace's heart pounded, and every instinct screamed caution, yet an undeniable compassion compelled her to investigate. Kneeling in the rain, she gently lifted one bag, its damp fabric clinging to her gloved hands. As she unfastened the drawstrings, the bag revealed a scene so shocking it nearly stole her breath: a tiny baby boy, his eyes wide with frozen terror, peering up at her as if he'd been expecting rescue all along. In that moment, time seemed to suspend itself. The boy's delicate features were marred by the harshness of the night, his tiny body shivering uncontrollably. With trembling hands, Grace quickly moved to the second bag. Inside, hidden among layers of wet fabric, was another tiny life, a baby girl whose weak, shivering form seemed even more fragile. Clutched to her chest were the remnants of a crumpled note, its ink smeared by rain, but the words remained startlingly legible. "I'm sorry. This is the only way." The note hinted at a desperate decision, one that had cost a parent everything yet was driven by an unyielding need to ensure these children would be found. Overwhelmed by a mix of terror, sorrow, and an unexplainable hope, Grace gathered the two infants and hurried them inside. The roaring storm outside was no match for the fierce protection that flared within her as she wrapped them in warm blankets, whispering promises of safety and care. In that one moment, Grace understood that fate had entrusted these innocent lives to her, marking the beginning of a story that would challenge her resolve and transform the lives of all involved. The night was far from over, and as thunder rumbled overhead, a sense of impending change settled over Haven's Light, a night that would forever be etched in the memories of those who bore witness to the miracle and mystery of the abandoned children. Shaken but determined, Grace cradled the two infants, feeling the fragile beats of their hearts beneath her fingertips. The storm continued its relentless assault on the shelter's exterior as she ushered them into a warm, dry room, laying them carefully on a stack of soft blankets near a gently crackling fireplace. Every detail in that room, the flickering light, the musty smell of old wood, and the quiet hum of distant thunder, seemed to heighten the gravity of the moment. Grace examined each baby, noting the stark contrast between the frigid, abandoned exterior and the fragile, yet resilient, interior of these new lives. Their tiny hands, curled in a semblance of innocence, spoke of a vulnerability that filled her with equal parts dread and maternal protectiveness. Without hesitation, Grace picked up the phone and dialed 911, her voice trembling as she explained the unimaginable discovery. The operator's calm, methodical tone brought a brief measure of reassurance amidst the swirling chaos of her emotions. Within minutes, flashing red and blue lights pierced the gloom of the night as emergency responders arrived at Haven's Light. Paramedics quickly assessed the infants, their professional demeanor belying the urgency of the situation. One paramedic checked the baby boy's temperature, while another examined the girl, confirming that though they were cold and weak, both were very much alive. It was clear that swift action was required to save these lives from the lingering grip of the storm and the darkness of abandonment. In the midst of the controlled chaos, Detective Ryan Mercer arrived, his eyes keenly surveying every detail of the scene. He listened intently as Grace recounted the harrowing events, the sound of the rain and the distant wail of sirens creating a somber backdrop. With measured steps, he accepted the crumpled note from Grace, a small piece of evidence that hinted at a far larger mystery. His face tightened as he read the simple yet haunting apology scribbled on the paper. It was a silent testament to a decision made under unbearable circumstances, one that had altered the course of two lives forever. As the paramedics carefully lifted the infants onto stretchers and whisked them away towards St. Luke's Hospital, Grace and Detective Mercer retreated inside to review the shelter's security footage. However, in an uncanny twist of fate, the cameras had gone dark just moments before the mysterious bags appeared. The absence of recorded evidence left them with more questions than answers. Had the perpetrator ensured the cameras were disabled, or was it simply an unfortunate coincidence in the middle of a tumultuous night? Each unanswered query added layers to the mystery that now enveloped Haven's Light. The silent storm outside was now joined by a storm of uncertainty and grief within, as Grace grappled with the impossible decision that had led to this desperate call for help. Detective Mercer's mind raced as he combed through the scant clues left behind by the mysterious arrival of the infants. The absence of any recorded evidence on the shelter's security cameras was both unnerving and suggestive. This was no random act of abandonment, but a carefully orchestrated delivery by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. As the rain pounded against the windows of Haven's Light, Mercer ordered an extensive review of surveillance footage from neighboring streets and buildings. A nearby camera, located just 2 blocks away, eventually revealed a faint glimpse of a shadowy figure under a heavy hood, walking purposefully through the downpour. The figure's face was obscured by the shadow and the relentless rain, yet a peculiar silhouette hinted at the weight of a burden being carried, a burden that might include one of the canvas bags. The footage, grainy and almost surreal in its simplicity, was the only tangible lead Mercer had. The detective's eyes narrowed as he scrutinized every frame, piecing together the slow, deliberate movements of the figure. There was a distinct hesitancy in the way the person moved, as if weighed down by remorse or trepidation. Mercer couldn't help but wonder if this individual had been driven by an act of desperation or a final, heartbreaking act of love. The mystery deepened as Mercer recalled the note's stark apology, a message that spoke of regret and the grim necessity of the act. In that moment, the detective's resolve hardened. Finding this elusive figure was now not only a matter of solving a case, but also of understanding the tragic forces that drove someone to commit such an unimaginable act. Back at the shelter, Grace felt a profound sense of unease as she watched the ambulance carry away the infants. The rain had lessened to a steady drizzle, yet the atmosphere remained heavy with sorrow and unanswered questions. Alone in her office, she stared out at the wet streets, pondering the paradox of love and desperation that had unfolded before her eyes. Someone had taken an unfathomable risk to ensure that these babies would be found, a person who must have been tormented by inner demons and circumstances beyond control. The raw emotion of the night pressed against her heart like a physical weight, a constant reminder that behind every tragedy lay a story too complex to be unraveled by simple explanations. As the hours passed and the storm finally began to subside, Mercer's investigation into the shadowy figure grew more focused. He interviewed local shop owners, reviewed additional footage from nearby buildings, and meticulously documented every small detail. In the midst of the quiet aftermath, every raindrop on the pavement seemed to whisper fragments of a forgotten tale, a tale of sacrifice, regret, and a desperate bid to protect life even at the highest personal cost. With each passing moment, the mystery of the abandoned bags deepened, leaving Mercer and Grace both determined and haunted by the echoes of that fateful, stormy night. When dawn finally broke over Seattle, the first rays of light revealed a new reality at St. Luke's Hospital. Grace received a call from Dr. Patel, the attending physician responsible for the care of the 2 abandoned infants. His measured voice over the phone carried both relief and caution. According to Dr. Patel, the baby girl, Sophie, had suffered from mild dehydration but was stable, while the baby boy, now named Noah for the sake of identification, was showing encouraging signs of recovery. The news filled Grace with a tentative hope, a fragile light amid the darkness of uncertainty. Yet, even as relief washed over her, a new, daunting question emerged. What would become of these children now that they were under the care of a system that wasn't designed to handle such extraordinary circumstances? Back at Haven's Light, the shelter's atmosphere had transformed overnight. The events of the storm had left an indelible mark on every staff member, and whispers of the abandoned infants had spread quickly throughout the community. Some neighbors expressed deep concern and offered heartfelt support, while others remained puzzled by the inexplicable decision behind the abandonment. Grace, however, was singularly focused on the welfare of Noah and Sophie. Despite knowing that the shelter wasn't licensed for neonatal care, she couldn't ignore the compelling force that urged her to take responsibility. Determined to shield the babies from the cold indifference of bureaucracy, Grace immediately proposed a plan for temporary guardianship. knowing that the foster system might not offer the warmth and personalized care that these fragile lives deserved. Dr. Patel's update also came with an unexpected challenge. With Noah and Sophie now in need of continued medical observation, hospital staff were preparing for the possibility of complications that might arise in the coming days. While Dr. Patel expressed optimism, he also warned that both infants would require regular checkups and a carefully monitored environment. In a hushed conversation between Grace and the social worker on duty, it became clear that the path ahead was fraught with obstacles. The social worker hesitated at first, citing the shelter's lack of official certification for infant care. Yet, Grace's unwavering resolve, her deep belief that these children deserved a safe haven, eventually swayed the decision. In that pivotal moment, a plan began to take shape. A temporary arrangement where Haven's Light would act as the infant's guardian until a more permanent solution could be found. Throughout the day, as Grace moved between the hospital and the shelter, she encountered both kindness and resistance. Some community members offered to help, donating supplies and volunteering their time, while others questioned the wisdom of taking on such an immense responsibility. Every conversation was a reminder of the immense stakes at play, a delicate balance between compassion and the harsh realities of an underfunded social system. As the day wore on and the initial shock began to fade, Grace found herself wrestling with a profound internal conflict. The babies had been given a second chance at life, but at what cost? The haunting words on that crumpled note, the mystery of the abandoned bags, and the collective heartbeat of a community in crisis had all converged into one immutable truth. These children were now her responsibility, and she would stop at nothing to ensure that they thrived. Later that afternoon, after spending hours at the hospital and comforting anxious staff, Grace returned to Haven's Light with a renewed sense of purpose. In the quiet solitude of the shelter's makeshift nursery, she sat beside the softly crying infants, Noah and Sophie, their fragile forms cradled in the gentle glow of a bedside lamp. Every tiny sigh and flutter of their fingers tugged at her heart. The shelter, once a place of routine and administrative concerns, had transformed into a sanctuary of hope and new beginnings. Grace understood that names carried weight. Each name was a promise of identity, belonging, and love. Determined to gift the children not just with survival, but with the hope of a future filled with warmth and belonging, she began the delicate process of naming them. After much contemplation, Grace chose the name Noah for the resilient baby boy, a name that symbolized a promise of protection and new beginnings amidst a turbulent storm. For the delicate baby girl, she selected the name Sophie, a gentle name that conveyed grace and quiet strength despite the hardships she had already endured. As she whispered the names for the first time, a strange sensation of solace washed over her. In that small act of naming, Grace felt that she was stitching together the torn fabric of a family that had once been lost. The names resonated in the silent room, affirming that the babies were not mere victims of circumstance, but individuals with destinies yet to be written. Grace shared her heartfelt decision with Emily, her longtime and trusted volunteer, who immediately embraced the vision with quiet enthusiasm. Together, they set about preparing the nursery. The room, which had once been a storage space for old blankets and donated clothes, was transformed with gentle care. Soft toys, handmade quilts, and small trinkets that whispered of hope were arranged neatly around the crib. Every item was chosen with the belief that the children deserved nothing short of tenderness and security. As Grace worked diligently, she couldn't help but marvel at the irony of life. How a single act of despair had led to the creation of something profoundly beautiful. Amid the soft hum of conversation and the rustle of freshly laundered linens, the shelter seemed to breathe in new life, a testament to the indomitable spirit of compassion that bound its community together. Outside, the morning sun began to warm the once frozen streets of Seattle, and in that quiet transition, Haven's Light evolved into a beacon of hope. Grace knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, from navigating the complexities of the foster care system to ensuring that Noah and Sophie would always feel loved and secure. But in that defining moment, every struggle, every unanswered question from that stormy night, was eclipsed by a single, resounding truth. The babies had been found, and they now carried within them the promise of a future forged by love and determination. The act of naming was more than symbolic. It was a declaration that these lost souls were finally home, a sentiment that would carry them forward into a life of healing, growth, and unconditional love. Weeks passed, and the story of the abandoned infants spread beyond the confines of Haven's Light like ripples in a vast pond. The local community, already stirred by the poignant events of that fateful storm, found solace and inspiration in the resilience of Noah and Sophie. Amid the growing public interest, a couple emerged whose gentle presence and quiet determination resonated with the very essence of the shelter's mission. David and Rachel, who had longed for an opportunity to open their hearts and home through adoption, visited Haven's Light one crisp autumn afternoon. Their eyes met Noah's for the first time, and an immediate, inexplicable connection was forged. During the ensuing weeks, David and Rachel spent every available moment at the shelter, carefully getting to know Noah. The couple's warmth, patience, and genuine concern created an atmosphere where the baby boy began to relax. Under their watchful care, Noah's initial fear transformed into tentative smiles and small, trusting gestures. Grace watched these interactions with mixed emotions, a bittersweet blend of joy for the newfound family bond and sorrow for the inevitability of letting go. In countless heartfelt conversations, Grace explained the complex path that had led to Noah's abandonment, the desperate decision of a parent who had chosen a heartbreaking sacrifice over a life filled with uncertainty. Each word, laden with both regret and compassion, served to bridge the gap between the mysterious past and the hopeful future that lay ahead. After a series of careful evaluations by both social workers and adoption experts, the decision was made. With tears glistening in their eyes, Grace bid farewell to Noah, knowing that every step he took away from the shelter was a testament to the possibility of redemption and new beginnings. The day of Noah's adoption was marked by a quiet ceremony at Haven's Light, a moment where relief and grief coexisted. As David and Rachel gently lifted Noah into their arms, a palpable sense of both loss and hope permeated the room. Grace felt as though a chapter of a long, tumultuous story was closing, even as a promising new one began. In the days that followed, while the shelter slowly settled back into its routine, the memory of Noah's departure lingered like a bittersweet echo. David and Rachel visited frequently, ensuring that the bond formed with Noah in those critical early days would continue to flourish. For Grace, every smile from Noah in his new home became a reminder of the fragile beauty of second chances. Yet, amid the celebration of this newfound family, a quiet worry tugged at her heart. Sophie remained at Haven's Light, her eyes filled with a longing that hinted at unresolved pain and unspoken questions. The shelter had become a crucible of hope and heartbreak, where every ending carried the seed of a new beginning, and every joyful farewell was shadowed by the challenges yet to come. While Noah found solace and security in the loving arms of David and Rachel, little Sophie continued to reside at Haven's Light, her quiet presence a poignant contrast to the bustling activity that had followed her brother's adoption. Days melted into weeks, and Sophie's silent struggle became increasingly evident to everyone at the shelter. Unlike Noah's rapid acceptance of love and care, Sophie's responses were muted and hesitant. Whenever someone tried to pick her up or soothe her with soft words, she recoiled, as if the physical contact threatened to shatter the fragile walls she had built around her heart. Grace observed these subtle signs with growing concern. Each time a well-meaning volunteer or potential adopter approached her, Sophie's eyes would dart away, and her tiny body would stiffen in response. Even the warmth of a comforting embrace often left her trembling and distressed. The child's reluctance was not born of spite or stubbornness. Rather, it spoke of a deep-seated pain and a loss of trust that extended far beyond the physical abandonment she had experienced. It was as though Sophie was waiting for a sign, a person who could break through the barriers of fear and loneliness that had become her constant companions. Potential adopters came and went, each leaving with promises of love, but also with a sense of disquiet. Their inability to connect with Sophie left them discouraged, and gradually, word began to spread that Sophie might never be ready to embrace the love that others so readily offered. In hushed conversations with Emily and other staff members, Grace grappled with the painful reality that not every child heals at the same pace, and that sometimes the scars of early abandonment run deep. Each rejection by a prospective family weighed heavily on her heart, fueling a desperate need to find the one person who could reach through Sophie's silence. As days turned into a blur of unanswered questions and quiet despair, Grace spent long hours sitting beside Sophie's crib, whispering gentle reassurances and promising that one day she would find someone who truly understood her pain. In the lull of the evening, as the soft hum of the shelter's air conditioning mingled with the distant sound of night traffic, Sophie would occasionally let slip a small, tentative smile, an almost imperceptible glimmer of hope amid the pervasive fear. Grace began to wonder if, somewhere in the labyrinth of Sophie's memories, there lay the possibility of healing, if only someone could patiently earn her trust and unravel the tangled threads of her past. The shelter's staff, too, grew increasingly concerned, and many speculated that Sophie was silently signaling her need for a different kind of care, a nurturing presence that could navigate the delicate balance between compassion and the unspoken boundaries of a heart scarred by loss. Grace, ever vigilant, started reaching out to specialists and pediatric experts, determined to understand the underlying causes of Sophie's resistance and to develop a plan that would eventually lead to her full emotional recovery. In the quiet moments between the daily routines of the shelter, Grace's thoughts often returned to the mysterious circumstances of that fateful night. The note, the unknown parent, and the desperate choice that had left Sophie alone and adrift in a world that seemed at once cruel and indifferent. One brisk afternoon, as autumn leaves danced outside Haven's Light, a knock at the door signaled the arrival of someone unexpected. Emily, who had long shared Grace's concern for Sophie, opened the door to reveal Dr. Olivia Bennett, a pediatric specialist with a calm yet determined presence. Olivia's eyes, compassionate and observant, held a depth of understanding that seemed to reach into the very soul of those who needed healing. Having heard of Sophie's unique struggle through the grapevine of community whispers, Olivia had come not only out of professional duty, but also from a deep personal conviction that every child deserved the warmth of unconditional care. As Olivia stepped into the shelter, the atmosphere seemed to shift subtly. The quiet determination that had always defined Haven's Light mingled with the promise of new beginnings. Over a cup of tea in a sunlit corner of the shelter's common room, Grace and Olivia discussed Sophie's case in gentle, measured tones. Olivia listened intently as Grace recounted the mysterious circumstances of Sophie's arrival, the heart-wrenching note, and the subsequent struggle to earn the baby's trust. In that conversation, Olivia's voice was soft yet resolute. She spoke of her own experiences working with traumatized children, of the delicate art of building trust from shattered remnants of fear and despair. That afternoon, Olivia requested to see Sophie. With cautious optimism, Grace led her to the nursery where Sophie lay quietly, surrounded by soft toys and gentle lullabies playing from a small music box. The moment Olivia knelt beside Sophie's crib, something in the child seemed to shift. At first, Sophie's tiny hands clenched in apprehension, and her eyes darted away as if searching for an escape. But as minutes turned into a quiet, shared silence, Olivia's gentle presence began to weave a fragile thread of connection. It was a subtle change, a softening of Sophie's features, a barely perceptible reaching of her hand towards Olivia's outstretched fingers. In that moment, Grace watched with bated breath. The spark of recognition in Sophie's eyes, the slow, almost imperceptible movement of her hand, and the comforting murmur of Olivia's soothing words together signified the beginning of something extraordinary. It was as if the child, for the first time, sensed that this caring stranger might be the one capable of unraveling the deep-seated fears that had held her captive for so long. Later that evening, as the sky darkened and the shelter settled into a gentle quiet, Grace and Olivia reviewed the day's events. They both felt that while Sophie's journey towards trust was only just beginning, the subtle breakthrough was a powerful sign. Olivia assured Grace that she would continue to visit daily, determined to build the trust and bond that had so far eluded this fragile soul. With each patient, heartfelt interaction, Olivia believed that Sophie would gradually learn to embrace a world that was no longer threatening, but instead filled with compassion, care, and endless possibilities for healing. In the days that followed, Olivia's visits became a steady, comforting presence at Haven's Light. Each morning, as the sun's gentle rays crept through the shelter's windows, Olivia arrived with a quiet determination and a satchel of soft toys, picture books, and small tokens of affection, all carefully chosen to coax out the shy smiles from Sophie. With every visit, the fragile connection between doctor and child deepened. Sophie, once perpetually guarded, began to show signs of recognition whenever Olivia entered the room. Her previously tense little body would relax ever so slightly, and sometimes, for a brief moment, her eyes would meet Olivia's with a look of tentative hope. As days turned into weeks, Grace observed that the bond between Olivia and Sophie had grown in a way that transcended the typical caregiver-child dynamic. One evening, as the shelter quieted and the only sound was the soft hum of the heating system, Olivia cradled Sophie in her arms while speaking in hushed, soothing tones. Grace watched from a respectful distance, her heart filled with a mixture of relief and awe. In that moment, Sophie, who had long been a prisoner of her own fear, finally allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. A soft sigh escaped her, and her tiny fingers clutched at Olivia's shirt, a silent plea for comfort and connection. Moved by this breakthrough, Olivia turned to Grace with a determined look. In a voice that trembled only slightly with the weight of her emotions, she confessed that she felt more than just professional concern for Sophie. It was as if each day spent nurturing the fragile bond had awakened something deep within her, a profound maternal instinct that she could no longer ignore. Olivia admitted that the more she cared for Sophie, the more she recognized a calling she had long suppressed. Yet, amidst the hope and the budding affection, there was also an undercurrent of fear. Olivia acknowledged that the idea of adopting Sophie, a decision that would change both of their lives irrevocably, filled her with both excitement and trepidation. Grace listened carefully as Olivia shared her internal struggle. The doctor's voice wavered as she spoke of the risks involved in taking on a child with such a complex past, the fear of not being able to heal old wounds, and the overwhelming responsibility of becoming a permanent figure in Sophie's life. But in that quiet, tender moment, Grace saw a resolve in Olivia's eyes that could not be ignored. With empathy and quiet strength, Grace encouraged Olivia to follow her heart. She reminded her that sometimes love required brave leaps of faith, and that Sophie deserved nothing less than the unconditional care that only someone who truly understood her could offer. As the night deepened and the shelter settled into a hushed stillness, Olivia made a decision that would forever alter the course of both her life and Sophie's. With a steady voice and a heart full of hope, she promised that she would do whatever it took to make Sophie feel safe and cherished. Olivia resolved to begin the process of adoption, even though the path ahead was fraught with uncertainties. In that single, defining moment, a quiet revolution began, a revolution of trust, healing, and the transformative power of a mother's love. The silent promise that hung in the air was that no matter how long the road might be, Sophie would no longer have to face the world alone. The day of change arrived slowly, like the gradual light of dawn that crept over Seattle's skyline. At Haven's Light, a sense of anticipation mingled with quiet sorrow as the time neared for Sophie to leave the shelter. Despite the melancholy of farewells, there was also an undeniable hope that this day would mark the beginning of a new chapter filled with healing and unconditional love. In the early hours of the morning, as the shelter's corridors were bathed in a soft, amber glow, Olivia arrived at Haven's Light with all the documents and hopeful determination needed to finalize her adoption application. Inside the nursery, Sophie lay in her crib surrounded by the familiar warmth of her blankets and toys, a small sanctuary that had seen her through countless nights of loneliness. The room, filled with memories of both joy and sorrow, was about to witness a bittersweet farewell. Grace and Emily helped prepare Sophie for the transition, ensuring that every detail was attended to with the care of someone who had nurtured a fragile life back to health. As Olivia gently cradled Sophie, there was a profound stillness in the air, a silence filled with promises of a future where fear would be replaced by love and sorrow by the gentle rhythms of a caring home. Outside, as the morning grew brighter, a car idled quietly at the curb, its interior lit by soft, inviting lights. It was time for Sophie's new journey to begin. With a tender smile, Grace watched as Olivia carefully secured Sophie into a car seat. In those precious moments, Sophie's wide, Searching eyes met Grace's one last time, a silent goodbye filled with the hope of return and the promise of new beginnings. Though the bond that had grown at the shelter was deep and bittersweet, it was clear that Sophie was ready to embrace a life of healing under Olivia's care. As the car pulled away from Haven's Light, a swirl of mixed emotions filled the room. For Grace, there was both the pain of letting go and the quiet joy of knowing that Sophie had found a place where her tender heart could finally blossom. Each tear that glistened in Grace's eyes was a tribute to the journey that had begun on that stormy night, a journey that had taken Sophie from despair to the threshold of hope. Meanwhile, the shelter itself seemed to breathe a quiet sigh of relief, a collective exhalation from a community that had fought against the odds to secure a future for one precious child. In the days that followed, Olivia's new home became a haven of gentle routines and newfound trust. Every morning, as Sophie woke to the soft hum of her new surroundings, the memories of the past were slowly replaced by the comforting rhythms of a life defined by care and acceptance. Olivia, with her unwavering patience and love, dedicated herself to helping Sophie overcome the lingering shadows of her early life. In quiet moments of shared laughter, whispered secrets, and small victories, a first giggle, a brave smile, the healing process began in earnest. The adoption was not merely a legal formality, it was a transformative promise that Sophie would finally experience a love that was unburdened by the pain of the past. In that promise, the foundation was laid for a future where every step forward was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of a new beginning. Settling into a new home was never an easy journey, and for Sophie, the transition was marked by moments of profound vulnerability and quiet strength. In the weeks following her adoption, Olivia dedicated herself entirely to helping Sophie navigate the labyrinth of emotions and memories that still haunted her. The early days were punctuated by small setbacks, a sudden bout of tears when Olivia stepped out of the room, an unexpected shudder at the sound of a creaking floorboard, or a long, silent stare that spoke volumes of unspoken fears. Every evening, as twilight softened the edges of the day, Olivia sat beside Sophie, recounting gentle stories and reading from picture books that spoke of bravery, love, and hope. The journey was far from linear. There were nights when Sophie's anxiety would overwhelm her, causing her to cry out in the dark, a poignant reminder of the scars left behind by abandonment. Yet, with each tear that fell, Olivia's resolve grew stronger. Patiently, she cradled Sophie, offering soft lullabies and the assurance that she would never be alone. Over time, moments of progress began to emerge, small victories that, while seemingly insignificant, were monumental in their own right. A soft giggle during a playful morning, a hesitant reach for Olivia's hand, and even the rare, fleeting moment when Sophie whispered a tentative "Mama" became cherished milestones in their long road to trust. Every day brought a new challenge, but also a new opportunity to heal. Olivia sought guidance from child psychologists and therapy experts, ensuring that Sophie's emotional well-being remained a central focus of their new life together. With each carefully planned session and every shared moment of quiet intimacy, Olivia helped Sophie peel away the layers of fear that had built up over a lifetime of abandonment and uncertainty. Even as the process was painstakingly slow, the gradual transformation in Sophie's demeanor was undeniable. The timid glances turned into curious looks, the hesitant responses into cautious smiles, and the pervasive silence gave way to moments of soft laughter that resonated in the stillness of their home. Olivia's patience and dedication did not go unnoticed by Sophie, who began to recognize that trust, though fragile, was a gift that could be nurtured with consistent love and care. The once overwhelming shadows of the past were now gradually receding, replaced by the gentle assurance of a loving embrace. Each small victory was celebrated not as a final conquest, but as an ongoing journey, a testament to the resilience of a child learning to trust a world that had once seemed so hostile. In the quiet moments before sleep, when Sophie finally allowed herself to settle and feel safe, Olivia whispered promises of a future filled with warmth and security. It was in those soft, intimate exchanges that the foundation of a lasting bond was firmly laid, a bond that would carry them through even the darkest nights toward a horizon bright with the hope of healing and homecoming. Months of tender care and unyielding dedication had slowly transformed Sophie's world from one of isolation and fear to a tapestry woven with hope, love, and the gentle certainty of belonging. In the cozy living room of her new home, bathed in the warm glow of evening lamplight, Sophie sat on a plush rug with Olivia at her side. The once fragile child now exuded a quiet strength, her eyes, once filled with trepidation, now sparkled with curiosity and a hint of joy. The transformation was subtle yet profound, a metamorphosis that only a nurturing heart like Olivia's could have inspired. Even as challenges remained, occasional bouts of separation anxiety and nights when the shadows of past memories crept in, Sophie's progress was undeniable. Every day, she demonstrated newfound confidence in small, meaningful ways, reaching out for Olivia's hand without hesitation, smiling at the sight of a friendly neighbor, or even engaging with a new toy without fear. In the gentle cadence of daily life, the echoes of that stormy night and the abandoned bags faded into a distant memory, replaced by a future built on the solid ground of trust and love. One crisp evening, as the golden hues of sunset gave way to the twilight of a peaceful night, Sophie did something that moved Olivia to tears. While sitting together in the living room, the child, with an air of quiet wonder, leaned in and whispered the word, "Mama." In that instant, all the hardships, the long nights of silent struggle, and the pain of abandonment converged into one luminous moment of victory, a moment that affirmed that Sophie had finally found the home and family she had so desperately needed. Tears streamed down Olivia's face as she wrapped Sophie in a tender embrace, vowing silently that she would do everything in her power to nurture the trust and love that had blossomed between them. Outside, the soft murmur of the neighborhood at peace contrasted with the vibrant life unfolding inside. Friends and neighbors, who had followed Sophie's journey with bated breath, shared in the quiet celebration of her newfound happiness. The transformation was not just in Sophie, but in the community itself, a living testament to the power of compassion, the strength of a family forged in adversity, and the enduring promise that every child deserves a home where love reigns supreme. In that final, transcendent moment, as night settled over the city and the promise of a new day lingered in the cool air, it was clear. Sophie was home at last. The shelter, the storm, the mystery of the abandoned bags, all had led to this singular truth. Love had triumphed, and a long, winding journey of healing had finally found its joyful destination. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Let me know your thoughts. Your support helps bring more powerful stories to life. See you in the next one.